let's start this thing off with the Seahawks. Like I said, I haven't been on the air since December, and we were right in the heat of the Seahawks season, so let's wrap that thing up. We left everyone with a preview of the Seahawks-Jaguars game, and we can all remember how that one ended with the Seahawks losing, Michael Bennett starting a fight, Quentin Jefferson trying to go into the stands. I mean, just a really poor display of everything you'd hope your favorite team would showcase for the Seahawks, and we could leave it at that. They did not make the playoffs. The Seahawks, not first time in a while. I don't know the exact 6 years.
6 years, yep.
No Seahawks in the NFL playoffs. That was disappointing. Excuse me. In the weeks that followed, Pete Carroll and John Schneider made significant changes to their coaching staff. The defensive coordinator, Chris Richard, is out. Offensive coordinator, Darrell Bevell, out. Offensive line coach, Tom Cable, out, amongst others. Replacing those people as the defensive coordinator, it's Ken Norton Jr. Offensive coordinator is now Brian Schottenheimer, and the offensive line coach is Mike Solari. What do you think of all of these changes? I mean, those were just the key ones. There were several others made as well. Mm-hmm. What do y'all make of the Seahawks coaching changes? What do you make of how the Seahawks season ended? Let's just talk about the Seahawks. And
I like it personally. I mean, it's just a change of scenery. Bevell really, he needed to go, and a bunch of people were calling for his head after the Super Bowl loss when he didn't run the ball down there on the 1 yard line.
Even though that was Carroll's decision.
Yeah. But ultimately, it was Bevell's call, and defensively, I like the hire of Ken Norton Jr. I just felt like the defense just was missing that it factor with Chris Richard. I don't know what it was, but the defense produced a little better under Ken Norton Jr. You could argue that for injury too, but overall, I like all the different hires that they made.
Seth, you got thoughts on these coaching changes from the Seattle Seahawks?
I like it too. I mean, they were all right in these categories, but they definitely dropped off from the previous couple seasons. I mean, offense finished 15th in yards, 11th in points, which is all right, but when you have Russell Wilson at QB, you should be in the top 10 for sure. They also gave up 85 sacks the last 2 years. So clearly something wasn't working with Tom Cable and the offensive line. And on the defensive side of the ball, there was regression there as well. They were 11th in yards. They were 13th in points allowed, which is the lowest that they've been, I believe, period, in the Pete Carroll era. So I'm perfectly all right with these coaching changes happening at this time.
They were all very, very interesting to me with the number and volume of changes they made. It kind of left me scratch my head, like, why didn't they just let go of Pete Carroll and start everything else? Start over.
It's a great question.
I mean, why not start everything over and blow it up from the top? By removing those people, it made it feel like that they were scapegoats for the players. Because, like I said, when we see this many coaching changes across any sport, it's because the head coach got fired and all of his assistants went with him. So now we're going to bring in a whole new group of assistants under the same head coach. It doesn't really make any sense.
That's a good point. And I mean, Pete Carroll is the oldest head coach in the NFL right now, correct?
Yes,
so, up there. Yeah.
He's got to be thinking retirement.
And there were rumors that, I mean, before the I believe it was the Arizona game, that Pete was thinking about retiring. So I mean, this kind of sends the message to us that, I don't know, maybe he's still in it for at least a few more years, and wants to make one more run at that Super Bowl. I mean, that's one of the only takeaways that I could get from it.
Yeah, I just don't. I think that with an aging roster, and obviously you talked about it, DJ, how injured the team was all year long. All these coaching changes is simply kind of an out for those players. It looks good to the public to make all those changes, but what are they changing?
Yeah.
If the head guy's still there, nothing's going to be new.
Even though it is an aging roster, I feel like everybody's just, you know, like you said, first time in 6 years that they haven't made the playoffs. Even though it is an aging roster, everybody, I still see the Seahawks as competitive in the West. Obviously, you know, the Rams just got better today by the addition of Marcus Peters. But, you know, add a few pieces here, like maybe an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman through the draft. Maybe a signed free agent or two. I feel like the Hawks could, you know, maybe not make a run at the Super Bowl, but get in the playoffs again. And if they're lucky, if things fall their way, then they can make a Well, I mean, that's the case for anybody, but they can still make that run at the Super Bowl possibly.
Yeah, you just laid it out. If they add different players, well, why didn't they start there? Keep the same coaches and add different players. It's just a loud noise-making move to fire all your assistant coaches and stay right where you are with the same group of guys. What do you expect is going to change? The players play, the coaches don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you give it 1 year, and if they miss the playoffs again next year, then maybe it's time for Pete to step away. Give him a chance to start fresh with a new group of assistant coaches. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, then hit the reset button.
Mm-hmm. You're saying, so Pete Carroll has 1 more year, I guess is what you're saying, and then if that doesn't pan out, that he should step down, and then
he still has the elite talent, the high-end talent on the defensive side of the ball. They might not be as good as they were in 2013, 2014, and we've still got very talented players on offense. I mean, Russell Wilson, you've got great weapons for him still, so there's not going to be an excuse. We'll cut him some slack for one year, but there's not an excuse if it happens a second time.
One thing that's going to be interesting to watch here going forward is the contracts of Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman, because realistically the Hawks aren't going to be able to afford both of those players. So there's been talk, maybe they move both of them through trade. Sherman is representing himself, so there's a lot of talk that he'll just play out his last year, because really his trade value has gone down ever since his injury of his Achilles. But I don't know. That'll be something interesting to watch at that back end of that defense, because they got to get younger there for sure.
If we can acknowledge that Seahawks secondary and the Seahawks defense in general aren't what they used to be.
No, they aren't.
Then why wouldn't the Seahawks pull the trigger and make the changes they need to? Because then that would start to make sense. If they trade Richard Sherman for whatever draft pick they could get, like you said, the trade value is down.
Mm-hmm.
So
he could even play out his last year and then have a great year, and we could use him for 1 more year. Even though they have regressed a little bit, I still see them as premier players in the National Football League.
In my opinion, if they go ahead and start moving some of the players that have been a part of this team for a while, like the Earl Thomas, like the Richard Sherman, the coaching changes make more sense. Right? Because you're in all likelihood going to move those players for draft picks, correct?
Most likely, yes.
So, if you're going to bring in new coaches, move those players, get new players, now everything's new and you are starting over just maybe a year sooner than people think.
Yeah. I could see that. You got to have somebody mentor the young guys.
Why?
Too. Just because jumping from college to the professional level, like we saw with the Aaron Rodgers, he sat behind Brett Favre for 4 or 5 years, and then he comes in and he's a premier quarterback. You gotta have someone teach you the ins and outs of all of the game.
Isn't that what the coaches are there for?
Yeah, but it's different. It's different
when there's a player doing it.
Just because a player-to-player relationship is so much more different than a coach. Like, I just don't know how to describe it, but you've played sports before. You know, like, you have players that mentor you, and then there's, like, coaches, and I can't pinpoint, what the difference is, but there is a difference there. It's like a brotherhood or something.
This is what I'm going to try and do. It's to push back against the cliche. Every year you hear about it, how a team's young, and that's why they don't do well. Well, a bunch of other teams are young, too.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. I mean, you can go on and on, pick your different cliche. So the only way people get better at doing anything, whether it be writing a sports story or talking on the radio or performing an action, is by doing it. So to think that players will get better because they sat behind Richard Sherman for a year, I don't know if I need to buy that or not.
I think the risk you take with just trading them both away and just relying on young players is that bad season, and that in Seth's point that he just made, that bad season will push Pete Carroll out the door, because these young players don't know what, you hit a wall at a certain point. Like, they talk about that rookie wall, and once they hit that wall, you're going to see drop off, just because they can't handle the long season that is the NFL, where if you have a guy like Sherman in front of you, you get a limited amount of reps, and you're able to kind of keep that young guy fresh throughout the season.
And I think we're starting to see the changing of the guards. I mean, we've got younger guys like Jaron Reed, Shaquille Griffin, who played huge roles this last year. They're both, first or second year players. So I guess to Christian's point, It does come from experience, but I don't think you want to do it all at once necessarily.
Why not?
Because that's not going to translate to wins.
Jumping off the deep end right there.
But are playing the old guys going to translate to wins too? I mean, they went 10-6. So what?
9-7.
9-7. They went 9-7. So you're going to run the same,
but
9-year veterans out on the field and go, okay, figured out.
A lot of the old guys got hurt, and we forced
right.
And
so they're going to be way healthier this time around, right?
It forced young guys in there, and we all saw how that translated. We missed the playoffs.
But are those young guys better because they played instead of watched? Yes.
Next season will tell.
Okay, that's what we're getting. Seth, do you have any final thoughts on this before we hit the break and maybe jump off the Seahawks for a while, hopefully?
Well, just really quickly, it'll be interesting to see what they do this offseason because a number of their big-name players are free agents right now. I mean, Jimmy Graham, Luke Wilson, you got Sheldon Richardson, Luke Jokel, Paul Richardson, and Blair Walsh. Not that he's going to be back next year, but... So
okay,
I don't know that they're going to be able to keep all of those guys.
Last thing, Sheldon Richardson has been a topic of conversation amongst people recently. What they should do with that defensive lineman. What would y'all do with Sheldon Richardson? Would you franchise tag him? Would you try and sign him to a long-term deal? What is the answer with Sheldon Richardson?
I think he's young enough yet that you try and sign him long-term.
I think with the amount of money he's going to want, I don't think he's worth it because I don't see him as a premier. He's upper tier defensive tackle, but if you're talking about cream of the crop defensive tackles, I don't feel like he's up there with Ndamukong Suh, Geno Atkins from Cincinnati, Gerald McCoy, Aaron Donald. Like, you just don't see that type of production from Richardson.
That'll be interesting. Like I said, all the new coaches and maybe some old players on the way out. Seems like a pretty solid time to start over if you're the Seattle Seahawks.
I do think that they need some more early round draft picks because right now they only have a first, a fourth, 3 fifth-round picks, and 4 seventh-round picks. So that's a really backloaded draft. I know, we've given credit to, who's their GM? Schneider. Yeah, we have given credit to Schneider for, finding those